Okay, so you got credit issues, big deal. You're like one out of how many millions of people that are struggling? So let's not talk about the problem, let's just talk about the solutions. So come with that attitude of, hey, let's get to a professional that can help me with the solution to get me from A to B to C. Just cut right to the chase. Give them what they know, but take it to a professional. If they're not a professional, do your homework in making sure they are who they say they are. Because there's a lot of fake people out there that are not businessmen and women trying to get credit. You know, there's a lot of fraud, as you heard earlier. From the real estate side of the house, whether it's a small business loan that you're chasing or it's to buy your first house, do your homework. If you got fingers to go on the internet and do some due diligence, show of quick hands. How many of you know what the 5 C's of credit? What's the 5 C's of credit? You ever heard that term? Mm-hmm. How many of you know what they are? That's why we need to educate ourselves on that. If you learn that, it's going to be a foundation for you on your own home ownership or your small business.
Also, you know, with secrecy and...
What are the 5 C's? Tell them.
Google.
The
5 C's.
So condition, right? Capacity, capital, character, which is your FICO score, your credit, right? And then I think I said, condition, capacity, give me one that I didn't. Collateral, thank you, collateral. Because you got to have collateral. That's called skin in the game. And I'll talk about that when we do our breakout. If you don't have those on the table, that's your foundation. And that's the banker's foundation, any lender around the country. We start with those 5 principles. You focus on those, get that right. That's called common correct. You'll see yourself going from A to B to C. And by the way, it is not impossible because every one of us panelists on this up here today, we all have a story.
Wow.
Just like you do.
Could you name those one more time, please?
So it's collateral, capacity, condition, character,
Capital.
capital. Capital is the money you're going to inject into the deal. And I'll go over that in detail. So, and everyone in finance should have that basic down. And whether you go to a commercial bank or a credit union or a small bank, we speak the same language.
So, you know, I think, well, the other panelists touched on it, and I know Maureen touched on it too, is, you know, secrecy, there's, you know, like 2 things that we don't talk about. We don't talk about sex and we don't talk about our finances. And we do. A lot of people do put on this front. You know, our keynote talked about, you know, what kind of red bottoms are you wearing? It's not all about that. If you really think about 60% of almost 60% of the U.S. right now cannot afford a $400 emergency expense. So let's be real about things, that you're not the only one in this situation, I'm not the only one in this situation, and we all have a story, we've all struggled. And so let's just kind of break down those barriers and those walls today, and let's talk openly, let's talk freely, because without having honest conversation, if you go to a bank to buy a house, you go to a bank to even finance your business, they're going to be up into every nook and cranny of your life and everything else. So let's be real about it. And that's the only way that we really can get to a point where you can position yourself for, you know, business ownership, home ownership, all of those things that help us build wealth. So, you know, we're bombarded by billions of dollars every single day. As soon as you walk out there, it talks about finance your life that way, buy. It doesn't tell you about how to invest in building stuff. So we already are being programmed from a number of different areas and different ways, just on a daily basis, how many signs we pass, how many messages we hear every time we turn on the TV, the radio, that tells us something that's contrary to building wealth. And then one last thing too, I know our keynote talked about, everything that she talked about went back to a mindset. So I think that's a very important thing as we think about it. So, you know, black and brown families, we have been enslaved in chains, physical chains. And it wasn't that long ago that we were in chains. But one of the things that I'll say is, to be real, is that the mental slavery, the mental chains, we have to break those. And I think that's one of the most important things, because when we talk about the American dream, I hear it all the time, American dream, owning a home, all of this. You know what, it has to be more than a dream, it has to be our American reality for black and brown families, because when we talk about it's less than a day that the dollar stays in our community, in black community, there's something wrong with that. I remember, who remembers 1510 KDKO back in the day? And Dr. Daddio. What he used to always say, Dr. Daddy, Black Dollar Days, keep, unity in the community. We got to get back to that.
If you don't know by now, you better ask.
You better ask somebody. That's right. But, those are the things I think today, the big takeaways is that we have to unlearn that programming that we hear, because we are. When she talks about financial freedom, that is freedom, period. Every time that you take out a loan, even for a business, even if you're saying, I'm a business owner, and I take out a loan, guess what? I just handcuffed myself to that financial institution. That took away my freedom, a piece of my freedom. So understand that. Understand what wealth is, passing it on to generations. So I'll kind of stop there, but...
That's a really great point, and we're going to come right to that. So a good segue into that is around positive mindset. So sometimes it's secrecy and things that we want to hide, but what are the things that we want to elevate in our mind? And so I was talking to Noreen about this the other day, and sometimes it's just doing the work. Doing the work.
So, okay, we're all family here, right? I probably speak once a week somewhere. So we got to be family in order to be honest, right? Who talks about credit at home? Awesome. How many have pulled their credit score recently? How many are afraid to pull their credit score? How many open their mail? How many are afraid to open their mail? Is it going to bite you? What's it going to do?
Straight up.
It comes back down to
I'm afraid of that credit score. I'm afraid of that mail.
We go through and we pretend through life. Then when we pretend through life, then you wonder what happens, and you wonder, where does this bill come from? This bill has always been there. I had a client the other day. I have a fortunate position at work with Dave. He's my other boss. I have to be nice when he's here. I work with him, and I'm a financial well-being coach. And that's very strategically placed at Operation Hope, because I'm looking at your finances and I'm there to coach you to help. And guess what? I don't charge anything to do that, so why wouldn't you come see me, right? But you sit with me inside a client the other day, beautiful client. She bought an outfit to come see me. Now we're talking about finances and debt, so she bought an outfit. So we're going through, and she and her husband together make, almost $200,000 well off. She's a very professional in what she does. She had 3 designer bags when she came in. She had, the Mac computer, all of this. Now, I'm talking about your bills and your credit. So we're going through, and we realized that she was spending in excess of $3,000 per month on nothing.
On nothing.
On nothing. Her credit score was very challenging. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but let me just tell you she couldn't buy a house or anything else. But she looked good. So when we talk about all of that, you have to take into consideration, especially what Dr. Judy just said. You got to look at what it is you're doing, and you have to show up in your own lives. So your credit matters. Your credit score matters. Your finances matter. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in business a long time, everything from vice president of banking to so on. However, last year this time, I sold my house. Now, I prided myself on being debt-free. Didn't know anybody, haven't known anybody. I pay cash for my cars. I do all that great stuff. I'm the greatest negotiator in life. I do something free every single day. But I had taken myself out of the credit game by doing all of that. So the only thing I had reported on my credit was my mortgage. That was it. I didn't have credit cards. I didn't do credit card debt. And prior to coming to Operation Hope, I'm like Cleo. I've been in this game a long time. I've underwritten for a long time. I know what sufficient credit and trade lines, and I know about pulling your credit, et cetera, et cetera. However, there was a bunch of things that had fallen off my credit report. So last year this time, I sold my house. I had 1 mortgage. I had the worst mortgage company known to man. I'm not going to tell you who they are. But when you call them and they said, leave this, this, and this, we won't call you back, you know they're not working on your behalf. So I sold my home. They paid my mortgage late. So what do you think my credit hit was for paying the mortgage late? It was the only thing I had reporting. If you pay a mortgage late, you're in financial distress. It's the hardest hit you will ever have. What do you think? Anybody? Any ideas? 110 points. Ooh. It took me from being lendable to not being lendable. Luckily, I wasn't about to go into another home because I wouldn't have qualified this time last year. But because I know what to do to build credit, I was able to go through. Yes, did I have to take out credit cards? Yes. I'm going to say this 5 times a day. But I don't have debt because credit is not income. credit is just to build credit. Okay, so if you didn't hear me, credit is not income. I had to rebuild my credit, and it took me about 3 months to get to where I was before.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I talk about sex and finance.
All right, Jack. All right now.
I think it's important, and
That's
that's
right.
the topic. But I think what I see in, and it's been hit on, but one of the things that I think I see is we have an issue with knowledge. Like I already know that. I already know that. I have actually had people explain to me their strategy on how to not let someone know that they don't know. This is the way that I ask this question so that I can get them to give me context so that I can pretend like I know. Wow. And there's an issue there because if you don't know, it's okay for us to not know. There are things that we are not going to know, right? You have to spend that time digging in and getting that information. So when I don't know something, I'm like, please tell me more. I'm not going to pretend like I know it so that I can feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. And one of the things that I'm very deliberate about is actually putting myself in rooms where I am not the smartest person in the room. I often feel like if I am the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. Right. And we hear that, but it's a very uncomfortable situation to walk in and listen to all these people talking about something and you have no idea what they're talking about. About 3 years ago, I started getting into the impact investment space. I walked into a room with about 160 white people. There's me and one other black person sitting in the back of the room, and I am listening for 3 hours like, what the hell are they talking about? I don't understand anything that they're saying. And so for the last 3 years, I have worked hard to understand impact investment and what that means and how that can affect our communities. And I still can walk into certain rooms now certainly with a greater understanding, but there are certain people that are in that space and they still are talking. I'm like, 3 years later, it is a foreign language. Wait, you have to slow down, right? But I don't shy away from that. And so one of the things that I run into, I get people who hit me up all the time. I want to start a business. And then they want to talk to me about starting a business. And I start giving them some ideas around how they need to go and how they need to move. And all I hear is, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. But then I don't know how to help you. Because there's something between your knowing doing gap at this point, right? And so in terms of where our mindset is, I think we have to get over some sort of embarrassment that makes us feel like we're less than or inferior because we walk into a conversation not knowing. And so when we talk about financial illiteracy, we know that we are financially illiterate. The numbers say that. There's about 50 people in the room. If we stand up, about 48 of y'all are going to have to sit down because we already know that based on your financial literacy and where you currently are, that you don't know how to handle your money. But we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to ask questions. We're not going to go to the meetings. We're not going to go and get the information because I don't want the person across the room or across the table from me to know that I don't know. It's a problem.
You know, I have to just throw this out because I have grandchildren. I have 2 adult children, and so very connected to the different generations from that perspective. And I hear a lot of stuff, well, I read this on the internet. Well, that's not always true what you read on the internet. There's more to the story on that. And talking to people all the time, I'll hear something to the effect, well, they're kind of checking up on me, or they're looking at my credit, or they're looking at my situation. Truth be told, nobody really gives a, you know what, about your situation. Where you are right now, everybody's at a different level. You're all trying to get from A to B, whatever that is in your space. If you reach out in your network, like we just talked about today, how many people have you met today that you're already thinking in your head as you're sitting there, wow, I need to talk to her, I need to talk to her, I need to talk to him. Get yourself on an appointment calendar with that individual, find out what they know, and then pass that information on. You know, secrecy is nothing more than your own perspective, because everybody knows, you know, if you've got a credit card, if you have a social security number, I can pull information on any one of you right now for your full financial profile, just like that. That's simple. Not no mystery about it, but the information is there. So you start from A to get to B. Working with clients all the time, they'll say, Derek, how do I fix my credit? Okay, I'll send you to somebody that I went to, risingpointsolutions.com out of Texas. When I left the bank and the economic crash hit back in 2009, I left the bank in 2007 to start off my own business. I used to own a jazz club called Jazz and Jackson, the Denver Pavilions. With that, I moved on, sold that business. Economy crash, I just left the bank, went from a 550 FICO score and couldn't borrow money. And by the way, borrowing money, there's good debt and bad debt. You borrow money for, there's a purpose for borrowing money. And it's only used for that purpose. But it's not, there's good debt, bad debt. A house is what, good debt? Would you say? Yeah. Land, right? When you own something, you control the whole program. And I totally agree with what I've been hearing here today. And I tell you, I've been blown away with just, the professor here was awesome in that regard. Going back to just where you go from when you walk out of this room today, get your business cards from these folks, set your appointments, set your plan in motion. And if I can do that, I'm a 780 now. It didn't take 5 years to get there or 3 months, but it took me almost 5 years to recover financially what I lost. And the big thing was, I had to put on my big boy pants and just get down and dirty and make my payments. Being a financier, I couldn't file bankruptcy. There's folks here that may have filed bankruptcy. So get over it. Now you got a new start. It's what you're going to do going forward. Do full transparency. Ask them how to get from, if you're talking to this young lady about getting your mortgage, what does she do? She helps you to get your funding for your mortgage, your home. You got a gentleman here who's a real estate broker. He'll help position you. He can't help you if you don't have a approval letter. It's a waste of his time, right? You go to her, you get yourself fixed. You go to this lady to get her to get your credit cleaned up. She sends you over to this young lady. You get your approval. This guy's happy because now he can show you 50 houses around the metro area that you didn't know existed. This is that simple.
So what I love about these stories that have been shared, so Noreen sharing her personal story, Derek sharing his personal story. Sometimes another mindset thing that we have is we don't talk to professionals because we think they already have it together. We think they've never been through anything, and so we don't want to show our vulnerabilities to anyone, including people that are professionals, right? But we have all been through something.
Yes.
Trust me, everyone in here, including myself. And so these stories are so beautiful to hear because we can all humble ourselves and get the resources that we need. So we are going to have a portion for the audience to ask questions as well, so please be thinking about those questions. The next part that we wanted to talk about was ownership and what that looks like in our daily lives and hear about a local experience that someone has had with recently buying a home in this economy. And then we're going to dovetail on that and talk about what that means for us as a wealth building strategy. So Jonathan, you mentioned that you would be able to come up and speak to us. Thank you.
I honestly forgot I was scheduled.
Just kind of the process, and it started before we actually went out.
So, good afternoon. I'm showing my feelings right now. I'm so excited to see how y'all like this. Let me just say that first off. Probably the last time I was this excited was when I closed on my home last year, thanks to Barry. So, as Barry mentioned, the process of buying a home started way before we actually started looking at homes. And that was my biggest misconception. I was driving around like, oh, we should get that home, or we should get that home. My wife looked at me like, fool, your credit's at 500. If y'all know Tamika, you know that's exactly how she said it. But she really had started even about 6 months before we even had that conversation of cleaning up her credit. Because we're married, we're a team. We knew that at the time, our son was about 4 years old, that he deserved to have a house to grow up in. Up to that point, we had only lived in apartments, and he couldn't go outside and play because there was just cars in the parking lot. So that was really one of the motivating factors for us to get him home. And so she started to clean up her credit, and then eventually she leaned in on me to stop spending so frivolously, start saving a little bit more. And then really she started investigating and studying the different options for buying a home. So again, I had no idea, we talk about this ignorance part, right? I had no idea that there are multiple programs that the government and different financial entities have in place to make the home buying process much, much simpler. Now, the one smart thing that I did in this whole equation was I brought Barry in, who really, as a realtor, and I'll leave that as a realtor, not just Barry, but he was able to walk us through the rest of the process that we just didn't know about. When we got to the point where we had got enough money to put down, and we had with the closing money, there's a term. Earnest, thank you. Barry introduced us to some programs where we were really looking at saving, I think, $4,000 or $5,000 just walking into the whole process of negotiating the loan and our finance rate. So then once we finally got to that point where we were approved and ready to buy a home, again, there's another professional that came into the equation, and Abby is, tell me her title again. Loan officer. Who, again, was just very, I mean, this is her business, but again, she was able to inform us and educate us so that we were making informed and educated decisions. And eventually, the process took probably about 4 or 5 months before we found a home that we really loved, and here we are, about 14 months later, we are homeowners. Our child is so funny, I love telling the story. The day that we we actually went and looked at the home before we closed on it. We had Julian with us, my 6-year-old, I mean, he's 6, but 5 at the time. And he's sitting on the porch, just kind of by himself, and some kids come out, and next thing you know, we're touring the house, and he's outside playing. We knew then this was the place for the kids. The unfunny part is, I have to tell this part, Barry, as we were looking at homes, Julian made it his point to check out everybody's refrigerator. So, if you're selling a home, make sure that your refrigerator is clean, because you might have a little nosy 1-year-old or first grader. So, thank you.
Thank you. So the question to the panel is, what are some of the opportunities that we can take advantage of to help us with ownership, and why is ownership so important?
Well, ownership, as Dr. Venetia pointed out, has everything to do with your freedom. And I think when it comes to thinking about how we need to go throughout our lives, we have to think about what it is that we own. And I think one of the things that, even just to touch back on our last one, is ownership of knowledge, but then how do you take that and make it income producing, right? And so we can talk about ownership inside of your home as well as being one of the primary vehicles to wealth that are in this country, but also ownership inside of your business. Being able to own your work product, own your knowledge, own your work product. And so with the Black Business Initiative, we do a lot around ownership. Well, we do a lot around wealth building using business ownership as a primary vehicle to wealth, because that's something that you can pass down. And so what we know is that when we own nothing, we don't pass it on to legacy. We don't build a legacy, rather. We can't pass that on. And so just a little bit about my story. I am second generation at this point, second generation middle class. My parents, my dad is in the middle of 15 kids. My mom is the youngest of 11 kids. And they worked really hard to make sure that they owned something. They didn't have a lot of education, but what they knew was that ownership was key. And so now, fast forward 30-something years later, my parents own about 6 properties. My sister owns 3. I own 2. And and my brother's in the process right now of beginning to own his own home. But how we got to that place really started with my parents making a decision to upgrade their home and not sell it. And so it's been one of those things when you ask what would happen if you had $100,000, someone gave you $100,000, quite literally my parents did that. Like, by the time, my job is to make that exponential for my children, right? So my parents, they didn't necessarily think 3 and 4 and 5 generations down the line, but they had enough foresight to think about what they could do for their children, and they put us in a position so that when we needed help with earnest money, when we needed help with clearing up debt, when we needed help with some living expenses to help build us up, get us over that hump while we were going through the home ownership process, we had someone who we could call. And we could say, hey mom, this is what I got going on, hey dad, and they came rushing to the rescue. And so now our family is literally building a portfolio of rental properties across the United States. And so we have property in Detroit, we have property in Colorado, we have property in Georgia, we have property in California. But it's been a long journey. This wasn't something that was built overnight. But now we're in a position where I have 3 children, my sister has 3 children. Fortunately for the children, my brother doesn't have any. But we are in a position now where thinking, further down the line, what that's going to look like. And it's been helpful in more ways than one, because thinking about what those different stories look like, it looks really great now on the outside, but it certainly has not always been that way. Even as recently as last year, I ran into a lot of financial turmoil for myself. I had my son, I work for myself, I eat what I kill. You have a baby, you're sitting down for a second. And so while I went through that process where I'm going through my maternity leave, my second daughter, I actually tried not to take maternity leave. I learned from that lesson. My son, I took a little bit of maternity leave time. At the exact same time that I took maternity leave, I had 3 tenants all lose their mind at the same time. So like a big chunk of my income was out the door. And because I had just invested and put pretty much the last of my liquid cash into this property, I did not have a lot of options. So it was credit card debt, or it was going into like liquidating assets. So I started selling off some stocks. I actually had to put a halt on that because I didn't want to walk away with having nothing. So then I had to go back and I had to call mom and dad, hey, this is what I need. Where I'm fortunate is that my parents had a surplus. They had assets that they could walk into. They had equity. They had savings. And so my question is, how many of us are in a position where our parents could do that for us, or where we can do that for our kids? And if we're not in a position where we can do that for our children, then we have to start thinking differently. Because luckily my children are still small, but if my daughter was 18 years old today, despite what I own, I would have to liquidate something in order to help her out. I don't want to have to liquidate. I don't have to lose my assets in order to help her out. So I'm in a process building my financial plan out to make sure that in the next 6 years when my oldest turns 18, that I can also gift her a home at 18 years old. So she'll start off that process a little bit further ahead than what most black kids at her age are going to be starting off with. But I think we have to think about ownership in that way. She needs to know that at no point ever in her life has she not owned. That's the whole vantage point. Her entire worldview needs to know ownership from day one. So now I'm fortunate that I have a 1-year-old, I have a 2-year-old. That's all they know. They don't know anything about renting. They don't know what that looks like. All they know is we own. So by the time they get 18, think about the power in that mindset. They would have never come from a position of not having ownership. And when we think about that, I think sometimes we see people who are, I don't know what's the right word, but we see people who have like that silver spoon mentality, right? The entitlement. But the other part of that is how we interact with the community. So the other thing that my kids have is they have a mindset of ownership, but the other thing they have is they have a mindset of community. So they don't come from a spirit of entitlement, they come from a spirit of how do we take what we've been given and make sure that we feed it into our community and give back.
So can I add to that real quick? I grew up on 22nd in Quebec. I went to East High School. I'm from here. So when you look at our neighborhood, we were a neighborhood. We all are still close friends to this day. My parents bought their home back then, in the 70s, paid $15,000. Those homes are now valued at $500,000. So two instances. One family, they're elderly, they had to sell their home. So the home's valued at $500,000. Guess what? He got $500,000. So when you're talking ownership and legacy, you have to talk about enabling as well. And sometimes we give our kids too much and we don't teach them the financial literacy around it. So it's one thing to have a home and give your children a home. It's another that they understand the ramification of that home, and that there's taxes during that home, and there's insurance during that home. So you have one family who aged out, they sold their home, collectively he has $500,000 in the bank, right, for his nursing home. You have the other home valued at just the same, walking distance from here to here, they didn't teach their child the financial literacy aspect of owning a home. So he lost the home to the city for taxes last year. This home that could have been sold for $500,000. So when you are giving, you have to make sure you're educating or you're enabling. We always laugh because, I'm not gonna tell you his name, but he always lived in the basement, right? And so he lived in the basement, he got married, and he brought his wife and kids into the basement. So they always lived in the basement, and we used to tell his mom, when you sell the house, does the basement go with him? I mean, what's gonna happen? And so because he had that basement mentality, when taxes came and the mom was gone into a nursing home, which she is now, instead of selling that home for a profit, he had no idea of the course. I stepped in and said, we can sell it, I can get it sold right away. We got it, like Jai said, everybody knows everything. So they lost that home for taxes to the city for a little under $20,000. So think about when you're talking ownership, you also have to talk about the fact that you're enabling those children that you have, that you're teaching them financially, that you're teaching them responsibly, so that if you have this legacy, it's not lost along the way.
And I want to just piggyback off of what Jais was saying, because it also goes into legacy. So we have to start with ownership somewhere. So it started with her parents. And again, when you're in an environment where you're being taught to do things a certain way, when you grow up, those are the things that you do. And then you teach your kids to do the same thing. So right now, she's teaching her kids about home ownership and legacy, and beyond that, you know, as far as looking at real estate as investments. And that's, I don't know where Jonathan went, but that's exactly what gets me excited about Julian, his son. You know, he went from opening the refrigerated doors to literally, he was not doing something he was supposed to be doing at home, like three months after they moved in. And he said, well, I'm gonna get my own house. And I'm gonna call Barry and see if he can. At 6 years old, that's how he's thinking. I don't know how many of you know Jonathan and Tamika, but I just want to see what this kid grows up to be, because he's got two amazing parents that are just pouring into him. But that's what we have to do, you know, again, whether it's the financial literacy part, whether it's the entrepreneurship and home ownership, we have to do that with each one of our kids. I know when Dr. Frazier was here a couple of months ago, he talked about, you know, the transformation of empowerment is about 100 years. And if it has to start, if that 100 years has to, year one is right now, then that means, okay, I need to take responsibility and show by example what needs to be done, and then teach those that are watching me, teach my kids, teach my grandkids, and, you know, within 100 years, again, we create legacy. Now,